How niche is Tokusatsu? Aside from being the title of this video, it's a pretty layered question that could lead to several different answers. What needs to be considered are other questions like, where in the world are you referring to? Are you only talking about the current time? What is your definition of what a tokusatsu is? The answer will differ drastically depending from person to person. Either way, for the sake of this video, we'll be looking at everything that could be considered relevant in answering this question in a general sense. Looking at both the way tokusatsu as a medium is seen today, and how it was perceived at different points in the past to reach our final answer. One thing we need to establish right off the bat is if something is considered niche, then it's something that appeals to a small sector of people with an implication that it's something an average person knows little to nothing about. So, let's first think about the amount of exposure established tokusatsu properties have nowadays. Starting out with Kamen Rider, while attempts have been made in the past to localize a franchise to little to no avail, recently we have seen, well, not exactly a flood, more like a trickle of content being released in the United States. In saying that, a lot of these have been heavy hitters. Futo PI, despite not being Toku itself, has been receiving great viewership and interest from those who are and aren't familiar with their franchise, drawing in anime fans to try out some of the live-action series in the process. The recent rollout of writer shows on the Tokusatsu service, plus 01 and Kuga on Blu-ray, is a much wanted and appreciated addition. Our wallets may disagree, but it's for the greater good. Kamen Rider Black Sun and Shin Kamen Rider have been highly anticipated from both fans and general audiences. With these new projects sparking interest in the franchise at large, even getting people to look back and check out some of the previous seasons, it's definitely a good sign that the series, and indeed the Tokusatsu medium, has a slowly but surely increasing amount of awareness towards it. As with all that we're going to talk about, the franchise has the potential to grow bigger than it currently is, but whether or not will be up in the air. That being said, if Toei's the kid sitting in its little corner not sharing their candy with anyone, Tsuburaya owns a free candy distributing factory, or something like that. Tsuburaya and the Ultraman series are being a lot better at pushing themselves into international markets. The company has been looking to branch out since the very beginning, but due to the actions of a certain Thai-based production company, such efforts only started majorly in 2019. And talk about making up for lost time. In just that short length of time, we've had every series from Z onwards releasing free on YouTube with English subtitles, DVD and Blu-ray box sets of nearly every pre-2019 series and movie in North America, as well as digital versions of most of them on Tokusatsu, episodes of non-current Ultra shows airing on Tsuburaya's YouTube account in regions that don't have access to these box sets, the highly praised and popular Netflix anime series, it was highly praised? The Netflix animated movie by Industrial Lights and Magic coming at some point, 3 comic miniseries by Marvel, including an upcoming crossover with the Avengers, UltramanConnection.com, a website made specifically for international fans and featuring live stream events with exclusive interviews and live battle shows, being one of the main franchise represented at Anime Expo 2022, and Shin Ultraman currently receiving a full worldwide release. Wow. It's fair to say Tsuburaya are putting their all in, with the intention to make Ultraman as big and as globally recognized as some of the biggest superhero IPs in the world. And more power to them, it's admirable. With the amount of content out now and coming in the future, there's definitely a mass market out there oblivious to the franchise's existence that could really end up loving it. That's not even to mention Ultraman 66 and Ultra 7's English dubs from the 70s, which a lot of kids at the time remember fondly to this day, including people like James Gunn, and Will Smith, oddly enough, or the projects that fell through like the English dub of Ultra Q. But as of right now, as with Kamen Rider, its big western splash is yet to happen. Will it reach a mainstream audience of people who don't actively search for it? Only time will tell. Out of all the bigger Toku franchises, Power Rangers is obviously the one which most people are familiar with. It was part of pretty much every 90s kid's childhood, being a killer in both ratings and toy sales, expanding into a franchise that, despite borrowing footage from another, has fully become its own entity. There really isn't exactly too much to say on that hasn't been said before. Everyone knows about the franchise, and everyone who grew up with it at least remembers it fondly, whether you began watching it on Fox, and whether it was on Disney, Nickelodeon, or now Netflix. Although, if you started watching Power Rangers as it's premiering new episodes on Netflix, are you even old enough to be on the internet? For legal purposes, that is a joke. There is something related to Power Rangers that we'll save for later, but for now, what about Super Sentai? Anyone who is watching this video will know that Power Rangers reuses footage from Super Sentai seasons mixed with newly shot scenes for sequences featuring the Ranger suits. Even a majority of people who aren't watching this video might know that just from hearing that's how they did it. For those people, this is likely where their knowledge of Super Sentai ends. In general, if you are someone who knows more or watches Sentai shows, you more than likely are someone someone who watched Power Rangers as a kid, and actively wanted to know the differences between the two franchises. And that's great, I'm glad. But it wouldn't be right to say that everyone out there has the same level of interest in doing that. In the same way, the Shout Factory DVD box sets are a much appreciated way for us to have a more legal means of discovering and watching these shows. But outside of us who already know about what they are, and despite their packaging designs tempting people who only know about Power Rangers to try them out, will your average consumer really want to buy and watch it? I'm not trying to sound super down or anything, but looking at it realistically, given the iconic status of Power Rangers, would your average Joe want to watch something that looks like that one kid superhero show from the 90s? Will it appeal to them to the point where they'd be interested in staying, interacting, and exploring their franchise outside of just knowing that it exists? Maybe someday we'll be in a time where that's the case, but as of right now, I wouldn't bet on it happening for a long while, if at all. While not exactly the same as we've been talking about, we have to bring up the king of them all, one that towers above the Power Rangers, both figuratively and literally. Godzilla is a name that every single person on Earth has heard before, exaggeratedly. Being the largest film franchise of all time, it's only natural word about it would get around. The original Gojira is hailed as a masterpiece and the greatest monster movie of all time. Every Showa-era Godzilla movie was released internationally in theaters and released on VHS. The 1998 movie, whatever your opinions on it are, had an aggressive advertising campaign that was all over the place and hard to miss. The legendary MonsterVerse has been met with enormous financial success. Shin Godzilla is regarded by audiences all across the world as a modern classic. All these factors add up to a character that is synonymous with international pop culture. Everyone is aware of it, but we're back to the question, how many people actually stay and engage with this series outside of just knowing it exists? A modern day mainstream United States audience is more than likely only going to have seen the MonsterVerse Godzilla movies, mostly down to the combination of the cinematic universe formula being such a popular concept with modern audiences, and the fact that they're simply big budget Hollywood blockbusters, which, like it or not, is a big draw to a lot of the general audience. Yes, Godzilla, and really everything we've talked about so far, has a cinematic universe of sorts before the trend began, but people simply don't know that. It's important to ask as well, the people who grew up on Godzilla, how many of them stayed and continued watching them as they grew up, and how many left him as a happy childhood memory. Given its transition to full CGI, by definition of the term, some might even say Godzilla is no longer a tokusatsu. This isn't me saying that it was better when it was and isn't good anymore or anything. There's no right or wrong answer there. Keep in mind though, Godzilla as a concept is so malleable that it can be reinterpreted to fit any situation. And if the only way a majority of people see Godzilla films is through modern CGI versions of the character, then that's totally fine. As with Kaiju Eiga as a whole, there will be a wealth of content waiting for them should they decide to take the plunge and are willing to accept the lower budget nature to them. It's important as well to not just look at contemporary factors. As we already know, Power Rangers is a tokusatsu that needs no introduction, and has seen widespread exposure across the world over the years. But what about the others? If you live in Asian territories, then the idea of toku in general being a complete thing is commonplace, which makes sense. Having your properties exported to international markets is a lot easier if you're exporting them to countries right next to you. Outside of that though, when looking back, Kamen Rider has still had a presence in other overseas regions. In America, the story isn't exactly pretty. Saban's Masked Rider, despite trying to coexist with the powerhouse that is Power Rangers, didn't catch on and was deemed a failure critically and financially, not leaving a lasting impression on audiences, which some would say is for the better.
Don't you know it's illegal to impersonate a driving instructor, buddy? Now I'm gonna have to teach you a little lesson. Ah!
Unfortunately, the same thing happened with Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. While it wouldn't necessarily be wrong to say it's an objectively better product than Masked Rider, it still couldn't bring in those all-important ratings and toy sales, again coming and going with little to no fanfare, not even airing its final 4 episodes on TV, almost ironically being more popular in Japan and other countries than the US. Speaking of which, when looking at the franchise's presence in other regions, it's surprising how much has been done. Many Showa-era seasons aired in Indonesia and its surrounding territories, with full dubs and often completely different theme songs, some of which go very hard. Several Heisei seasons received dubs in English in these regions, some of them in a pretty funny fashion.
This is where it all ends, worm. Time to Die, worm.
And only some of which are currently available online. Ultraman is as much an icon in China and Malaysia as he is in Japan, despite not having a widespread international push until recently outside of neighboring countries, which got a lot of the series Showa and early Heisei shows dubbed in English and other languages. It still managed to spread out before being temporarily halted by a certain Thai-based production company, namely the aforementioned dubs of 1966 and 7 and the cancelled Q dub, which did leave an impact on those who were watching them, and Sentai, which never really made waves outside of Asia, despite a few parody dubs being made. Within Asia though, a few not so well preserved attempts were there for the most part. It wouldn't be until a bit later when things would pick up. Bioman was big in France, like really big. To put it into perspective, Maskman and Liveman were later brought over to France, not as Maskman and Liveman, but as Bioman 2 and Bioman 3. Let's face it, if your international dub of a Tokusatsu series ends up being popular enough to have someone make a cover of the Numa Numa song about it being part of the show, then you know you've got a winner. Brazil used to be a big consumer of Tokusatsu content, with their dubs of Changeman and the Metal Hero series being very popular at the time, and are looked back on with fondness today. Countries in and outside the US have seen other various Tokusatsu shows become smash hits. Spectre Man, Giant Robo, and Ambassador Magma, or as it is known in English, the Space Giants, were all dubbed and released in the US, all of which are remembered well by those who grew up watching them. The dub of the 1978 series, Sayuki, simply called Monkey, but better known as Monkey Magic in English, was a big hit in both the UK and Australia. The UK also received an adaptation of the Thunderbird Star Wars Sentai Fusion series X-Bomber, renamed Starfleet, and given a new theme song by Brian May and Eddie Van Halen? Well, that just blew my mind. What the heck? As well as Metal Heroes. Brazil also showcased the two original Lion Maru shows. The Subaraya show Dinosaur Squadron Poseidon and Toho's Megaloman were very popular in Italy, the former even receiving a sick new theme song. Dinosaur War Isenborg was also extremely successful in Middle Eastern territories. The list can go on and on. This isn't even to mention the more recent physical media releases in North America like the Garo series, both Zebraman movies, and the upcoming Space Sheriff Gavan release. Sorry everywhere else, you'll still have to live without them for now. All these international releases all add up to more people knowing about what Tokusatsu is. But in saying that, how many of these audience members still engage with the medium to this day? I'd say a substantially lesser number than however many watched any of them originally. They have appealed to their imaginations and interests as children, but could the same be said for all those people today? But we have to think about one thing, a thing people take for granted. Some people see it as an insult, others as a punchline, but when looked at through the lens of the question, how niche is Tokusatsu, it can make you think about it differently, maybe even turning the argument into an open and shut case. That being a phrase I'm sure everyone watching this video has heard at least 17 times in your time watching Toku. Is this Japanese Power Rangers? As much as some people may despise this all too common sentiment, it actually tells us something very important. Tokusatsu, at least at a very basic level, is something pretty much everyone in the Western world is aware of. Sure, this saying may be viewed as weird towards us and the shows we love, but the widespread and frequent use of this phrase means that Tokusatsu as a concept and storytelling medium is one that isn't really a niche at all. People know about Power Rangers or Godzilla and the way they look through cultural osmosis. Even if they haven't actually seen the shows or movies, they know about them. These juggernaut franchises have their diehard fans for sure, but go out and ask someone on the street if they heard of either of them, and the answer will most likely be yes. At the very least, if you were to show someone a clip from either of them, they'd be able to correctly identify it. Show someone a picture of a few people in similar multicolored full-body hero costumes, or a giant vaguely dinosaur-like creature, and you'll get the same responses every time. Really, pretty much everyone from all over the world has been exposed to Tokusatsu at some point, whether they realize it or not. However, to me, I don't really see this as being an example of Tokusatsu not being niche, since this majority might not exactly know the specifics, as opposed to people like you and I who know the types of products these really are and watch them as part of a community. Now, after all that analysis, what is my answer? What do I personally think in response to the question, how niche is Tokusatsu? We've looked at the facts, but now it's time for opinions. In all honesty, when seen from a current day point of view, I think Tokusatsu is generally still niche, though it's been getting progressively more popular. That most likely is the answer you are anticipating right from the beginning, but look at it this way. People can identify what Tokusatsu is once you tell them it's like Power Rangers or Godzilla, even if that's just in terms of how it looks. But in terms of those who actually watch and engage with the shows and movies, the number is significantly less. YouTube views on, say, the most recent episode of Ultraman Decker may have like millions of views, or an out of context fight scene or cool moment may have several million, but that doesn't equal to those who actually stick with the shows and are into them as a whole. While obviously the amount of people who want to continuously watch Tokusatsu is increasing every day, it's important to understand that this style of filmmaking is going to turn some people away, whether that be from thinking it looks cheap or childish, or may not want to get stuck in a rabbit hole of things to watch. Every new fan is of course welcome. At the end of the day, it's all on the production company's desire to push out their franchises further and international distributors to decide whether a given series like Geats, Dawn Brothers, or Decker is worth importing, if they should put the marketing into it to make people aware that it's even a thing. I personally don't think Tokusatsu will ever get as big as the likes of Marvel, but that's okay. It's equally as important to understand that Toku is great to those who watch it, despite how small its presence and community is by comparison. Would I welcome it becoming a much larger part of pop culture? Absolutely, but will it realistically happen? That I can't say for certain, but what I do know is this: Tokusatsu is special, and all of us who know and appreciate that should enjoy it, no matter how many people don't even know it exists.